The evening sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Detective Lauren Chen sat behind the wheel of her black sedan, her mind still buzzing from the long week at work. She'd just wrapped up a major case at the FBI field office, one that had kept her up for 3 nights straight. All she wanted now was to get home, kick off her shoes, and maybe order some takeout. The neighborhood she was driving through was quiet and peaceful. Neat lawns stretched out on both sides of the road, and children's bikes lay scattered in driveways. It was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened, where people felt safe enough to leave their porch lights on and their garage doors open. Lauren hummed along to the radio, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. Her registration was up to date, renewed just last month. The car was clean, no broken taillights, no reason for anyone to pull her over. She'd been driving for 12 years without a single ticket. She followed every rule, every law, not just because she was a federal agent, but because that's who she was. Then she saw them, red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. Her stomach dropped. That familiar feeling of dread washed over her, the one that every person of color knows too well. It didn't matter that she had a badge. It didn't matter that she'd spent the last decade of her life serving her country. In this moment, in this car, she was just another black woman on the road. She took a deep breath and put on her turn signal, pulling over to the side of the road slowly and carefully. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she steadied them. She'd been trained for dangerous situations, had faced down armed criminals and walked into crime scenes that would give most people nightmares. But this somehow felt different. This felt personal. The patrol car stopped behind her, its lights still flashing. Through her mirror, she could see 2 officers inside. The driver's door opened and a tall officer stepped out. He was white, probably in his early 40s, with a buzz cut and a stern expression. His hand moved to his belt as he walked toward her car, and Lauren noticed it rested on his holster. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where he could see them. It was instinct now, something she did automatically. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Stay calm. These were the rules she'd learned growing up. The same rules her father had taught her brother. The same rules that black parents across America teach their children. The officer reached her window and leaned down slightly. His name tag read Officer Thornton. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. His eyes swept over her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "License and registration," he said. His voice was cold, clipped. Lauren kept her tone polite and professional. "Of course, officer. May I ask why you pulled me over?" "License and registration," he repeated, harder this time. "Now," she nodded slowly. "They're in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach over and get them, okay?" He didn't respond, just watched her with those hard eyes. His hand was still on his gun. Lauren moved carefully, her movements deliberate and slow. She reached across to the passenger side, her fingers finding the latch of the glove compartment. It clicked open, and she could see her registration papers inside, along with her FBI credentials and her service weapon, secured in its case as required by protocol. "Stop." The word came out like a gunshot. Lauren froze. Her hand was still in the glove compartment, her body stretched across the center console. Time seemed to slow down. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands right now." She pulled her hand back immediately, raising both hands high where he could see them. "I'm just getting my registration." "You asked for my registration." "Get out of the car." Officer Thornton had drawn his weapon now. The gun was pointed directly at her face, his finger on the trigger. "Get out of the car with your hands up." Everything Lauren had learned in her FBI training told her to stay calm, but terror was coursing through her veins. This was how people died. This was how traffic stops turned into funerals. She'd seen the videos, read the reports, attended the memorials for people who hadn't made it home. "I'm a federal agent," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear. "I'm reaching for my credentials in the glove compartment. My badge is in there." "I don't care what you say you are," Thornton shouted. "Get out of the vehicle now!" By now, his partner had gotten out of the patrol car. He was younger, maybe late 20s, and he looked uncertain as he approached. But he didn't question Thornton. He didn't tell him to lower his weapon. He just stood there, his own hand on his holster. Lauren's mind raced. She could see neighbors starting to come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Someone was probably filming. Good, she thought. Let them film. Let them see this. She opened her car door slowly, keeping her hands raised. "I'm complying," she said clearly. "I'm unarmed." I'm getting out of the vehicle. Every movement felt like it took forever. She swung her legs out of the car, her hands still in the air. The pavement was warm under her feet as she stood up, facing a gun that could end her life in a split second. On your knees, Thornton ordered. The humiliation of it burned through her chest. She was a decorated FBI agent. She'd taken down drug cartels and human traffickers. She'd put away murderers and saved lives, and now she was being forced to her knees on a suburban street like a criminal, all because she'd tried to reach for her registration when asked. But she knelt, because survival was more important than pride, because she wanted to see tomorrow, because she knew that this wasn't about what was right or fair. This was about power, and in this moment, Officer Thornton had all of it. The pavement dug into her knees. She could feel small rocks pressing into her skin. Thornton kept his gun trained on her while his partner moved toward her car. She watched from the corner of her eye as the younger officer leaned into her vehicle, opening the glove compartment fully. He pulled out her wallet, her registration papers, and then something else. Something that made him go completely still. In his hands, he held her FBI credentials, the leather case falling open to reveal her badge and identification card. The gold shield gleamed in the fading sunlight. Her photo stared back at him from the ID, along with her title, Special Agent Lauren Chen, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The younger officer's face went pale. He looked at the credentials, then at Lauren kneeling on the ground, then back at the credentials again. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Thornton," he called out, his voice cracking. "You need to see this." But Lauren didn't move. She stayed on her knees, hands still raised, knowing that the worst wasn't over. It was just beginning. Officer Thornton moved closer, his gun still pointed at Lauren. His partner, Officer Davis, held up the FBI credentials with a shaking hand. The leather case swayed slightly in the evening breeze, the gold badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "What is it?" Thornton barked, his eyes never leaving Lauren. Davis's voice came out barely above a whisper. "She's FBI, she's a federal agent." For a moment, everything stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Lauren remained on her knees, her hands still raised, rocks digging deeper into her skin. She could feel her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. But she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just waited. Thornton's face changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight tightening around his eyes, a small twitch at the corner of his mouth. He took a step forward, his hand extended toward Davis. "Let me see that." Davis handed over the credentials like they were burning his fingers. Thornton grabbed them, his gun finally lowering slightly as he examined the badge. Lauren watched him read her name, saw his eyes move over her photo, watched the realization sink in deeper and deeper with each passing second. The badge was real. The credentials were official. Everything about it screamed federal authority. There was her identification number, her clearance level, her photo in official FBI format. At the bottom, there was even a small hologram that shifted colors when you tilted it, an anti-forgery measure that proved authenticity. Thornton's gun hand dropped to his side. His face had gone from angry red to an ashy pale color. He looked at the badge, then at Lauren, then back at the badge. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind them, more neighbors had gathered. At least a dozen people stood on their porches or at the edge of their yards watching. Lauren could see at least 3 phones pointed in their direction, recording everything. Good, she thought again. Let them record every single second. "Stand up," Thornton said finally. His voice had changed completely. The aggression was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. Lauren lowered her hands slowly and pushed herself up from the ground. Her knees ached, and she could feel the imprints of the pavement on her skin. She brushed off her pants with as much dignity as she could manage, then looked Thornton straight in the eye. He couldn't hold her gaze. His eyes darted away, looking at the ground, at her car, at anything but her face. "Ma'am, he started, then stopped. He cleared his throat and tried again. "There's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Lauren felt something hot and sharp twist in her stomach. A misunderstanding. That's what he was calling it. Not racial profiling. Not an abuse of power. Not pulling a gun on an innocent woman for no reason. A misunderstanding. She held out her hand. "My credentials, please." Thornton handed them over quickly, almost dropping them in his haste. Lauren took them and flipped through the case, checking that everything was there. Her badge gleamed up at her, the words Federal Bureau of Investigation etched in perfect letters around the edge of the shield. She'd earned this badge, she'd worked for it, trained for it, sacrificed for it, and it had almost gotten her killed tonight because to Officer Thornton, it hadn't mattered what was in her glove compartment. He'd already decided who she was the moment he saw her face. "Officer Davis," Lauren said, her voice steady and professional. "I'll need your body camera footage from this stop." Davis looked at Thornton, then back at Lauren. "Ma'am, that wasn't a request," Lauren interrupted. "This traffic stop was conducted improperly. I was threatened with deadly force without probable cause. I'm within my rights to request all video evidence." Thornton finally found his voice. "Look, Agent Chen, we can work this out. There's no need to what?" Lauren cut him off. "To file a report? To make this official?" She stepped closer to him, close enough that he had to look at her. "You pointed a loaded weapon at my face. You forced me to my knees on the street. You did all of that before you knew I was FBI. But here's the thing, Officer Thornton. It shouldn't have mattered whether I was FBI or not. I was a citizen following the law, and you treated me like I was public enemy number one." A woman from one of the nearby houses called out, "We saw everything." "We recorded it." Lauren glanced over and nodded at the woman. "Thank you. Please save those videos. They may be needed." Thornton was sweating now, despite the cool evening air. "Agent Chen, please." "Let's talk about this reasonably." "Reasonably?" Lauren's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her controlled demeanor. "You want to talk about reasonable? Was it reasonable to pull me over when I wasn't breaking any laws? Was it reasonable to draw your weapon when I was reaching for the registration you demanded? Was it reasonable to force me to my knees in front of my neighbors?" Davis shifted uncomfortably beside his partner. "Ma'am, Officer Thornton was just following protocol for officer safety." Lauren turned to him sharply. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was protocol. I know protocol. I teach officer safety courses at the academy. What happened here tonight had nothing to do with safety, and everything to do with assumptions, dangerous assumptions. By now, another patrol car had arrived, lights flashing. 2 more officers got out, both looking confused about what they were walking into. The older of the 2, a sergeant based on the stripes on his uniform, approached the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Thornton and Lauren. Lauren reached into her jacket pocket slowly, making sure everyone could see her movements, and pulled out her FBI identification. She held it up for the sergeant to see. "I'm Special Agent Lauren Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was pulled over without cause, threatened with deadly force, and detained improperly. I'll be filing a formal complaint." The sergeant's eyes widened. He looked at Thornton, who seemed to shrink under the gaze. "Is this true?" Thornton opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Davis jumped in instead. "Sir, it was a routine traffic stop that escalated." You thought what?" the sergeant asked, his voice hard. "What exactly did you think was happening here that required drawing a weapon on a federal agent?" No one answered, because there was no good answer. There was no way to explain what had happened without admitting what it really was. Lauren walked past all of them, moving toward her car. Her service weapon was still inside, along with her other belongings. She retrieved everything carefully, aware that all eyes were on her. She checked her weapon, secured it properly, and gathered her registration papers that had scattered across the passenger seat. When she turned back around, Thornton had taken several steps toward her. "Agent Chen, I apologize. I really do. If there's anything I can do—" "There is something you can do," Lauren said, cutting him off. "You can think about this moment. You can remember how you felt when you realized you'd made a terrible mistake. And then you can ask yourself if maybe, just maybe, you've made this mistake before with people who didn't have a badge to make you stop and think." She could see the truth of it hit him. His face flushed red again, but this time it wasn't anger. It was shame. The sergeant stepped forward. "Agent Chen, I'll need to file a report on this incident. Can you come to the station to give a statement?" "I'll be filing my report through proper federal channels," Lauren replied. "You'll receive a copy. I'll also need copies of all body camera and dash camera footage from every officer at this scene. You have 24 hours to secure that evidence." The sergeant nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am." Lauren looked at each officer in turn, memorizing their faces and badge numbers. Then she got back in her car, started the engine, and drove away. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but inside she was shaking like a leaf in a storm. As she drove, she couldn't stop thinking about one thing. She had a badge, credentials, 12 years of service, and the full protection of federal law, and it had almost not been enough. What about the people who didn't have those things? What happened to them when Officer Thornton pulled them over? The thought made her sick to her stomach, but it also lit a fire inside her that she knew wouldn't go out anytime soon. Lauren made it 3 blocks before she had to pull over again. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't hold the steering wheel steady anymore. She guided her car into an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store and turned off the engine. Then she just sat there. The adrenaline that had kept her upright and talking was draining away, leaving behind something raw and painful. Her chest felt tight like someone was squeezing her ribs. She couldn't seem to get enough air. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that fogged up the windshield. She'd faced armed suspects before. She'd walked into situations where one wrong move could mean death. But this was different. Those were criminals. People who had made choices that put them on the wrong side of the law. Officer Thornton was supposed to be one of the good guys. He wore a badge just like she did. He'd taken an oath to protect and serve, and yet, for those terrifying minutes, she had been absolutely certain he might shoot her. The worst part was knowing why. It wasn't because she'd done anything wrong. It wasn't because she was dangerous. It was because of her skin color. That simple, horrible truth sat in her stomach like a stone. Lauren looked down at her knees. Even through her dark pants, she could see dirt stains. She rolled up the fabric carefully and saw the red marks pressed into her skin from the pavement. Little rocks had left indentations that would probably bruise by tomorrow. Physical evidence of what had happened. Physical proof that it wasn't just in her head. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from her partner at the FBI, Agent Wilson. "Still on for dinner tomorrow?" The message read. "My wife wants to try that new Italian place." Lauren stared at the words. Normal life. Simple plans. Dinner at an Italian restaurant. It felt like something from another world. A world where federal agents didn't get forced to their knees during traffic stops. She didn't reply. She didn't know what to say. Another text came through, this time from her mother. "Call me when you get home, honey." Love you. Her mother. God, how was she going to tell her mother about this? Her mom had worried every single day since Lauren joined the FBI. "It's dangerous work," she'd said during Lauren's graduation from the academy. "Promise me you'll be careful." And Lauren had promised. She had assured her mother that she was trained for danger, that she knew how to handle herself, that she'd be safe. But tonight, the danger hadn't come from a criminal. It had come from a police officer during a routine traffic stop. How do you prepare for that? What training covers being held at gunpoint for reaching for your registration? Lauren's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Agent Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Rebecca Torres. I live on Maple Street where you were pulled over tonight. I recorded the whole thing on my phone. I think you should have a copy of the video." Lauren closed her eyes. "Thank you. That's very kind of you." "It's not kind, it's necessary," Rebecca said firmly. "What that officer did was wrong. Everyone on the street is talking about it. We all saw it. You were just driving, and then suddenly there were guns pointing at you. It was terrifying to watch. I can't imagine what it was like to live through." "It was scary," Lauren admitted quietly. It felt strange to say it out loud, to admit vulnerability to a stranger, but somehow it also felt necessary. "I'll email you the video," Rebecca continued, "and I want you to know that if you need witnesses, at least half a dozen of us are willing to testify about what we saw. We have children on this street. If police officers are going to behave like that, we need to know about it." After they hung up, Lauren sat in silence for another few minutes. Then she opened her car door and stepped out. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand. She walked around to the back of her car and leaned against the trunk, looking up at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpoints of light against the deepening blue. She used to love looking at stars. When she was a kid, her dad would take her camping, and they'd lie on their backs identifying constellations. He'd been so proud when she joined the FBI. "My daughter, a federal agent," he'd say to anyone who would listen. "She's one of the good guys." But what did that mean anymore? She was a good guy who almost got shot by another supposed good guy. The lines were blurrier than she'd ever wanted to admit. Her phone rang again. This time it was her supervisor, Director Morrison. Chen, his voice was serious when she answered. I just got a call from the local police department. They said there was an incident involving you tonight. Yes, sir. I was going to file a full report first thing tomorrow morning. Are you okay? Were you injured? The concern in his voice was genuine, and it almost broke her. I'm physically fine, sir. Emotionally, that's a different story. Come in tomorrow and we'll talk about it, Morrison said. But Chen, I want you to know something. This isn't just about you filing a complaint. This is about a federal agent being targeted and threatened while off duty. The Bureau takes this very seriously. We'll be conducting our own investigation. I understand, sir. And Chen, take the weekend. Don't come in tomorrow. Spend time with family. Process what happened. Monday morning is soon enough for reports and investigations. After the call ended, Lauren got back in her car and finally drove home. Her apartment was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like the longest drive of her life. Every time she saw a police car, her heart rate spiked. Every time lights appeared in her rearview mirror, her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. When she finally pulled into her parking garage, she sat in her car for another 20 minutes before she could make herself get out. The concrete walls felt safer than the open street. Here, no one could pull her over. Here, she was just another resident coming home after work. Inside her apartment, everything looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Coffee mug in the sink, case files spread across her dining table, her running shoes by the door, waiting for a jog she'd planned to take after work. All evidence of a normal life. A life where the biggest concern was remembering to pick up groceries and finishing paperwork on time. She walked to her bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Same face, same person, but something felt different. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. A kind of knowing. A kind of hurt. Lauren rolled up her pants again and looked at her knees. The marks were darker now, starting to purple around the edges. She touched them gently, feeling the tender skin. These would fade in a week or two. The physical evidence would disappear, but the memory wouldn't. The fear wouldn't. The knowledge of what could have happened wouldn't. She thought about all the people who'd experienced what she had tonight, or worse, and who didn't have an FBI badge to make it stop. She thought about all the traffic stops that ended differently, that ended with families planning funerals instead of filing complaints. She thought about all the videos she'd seen over the years, videos that looked exactly like what had happened to her tonight, except those videos ended with shots fired and lives lost. She'd been lucky. That was the truth of it. She'd been incredibly, impossibly lucky that Thornton's partner had found her credentials before things escalated further. Lucky that there were witnesses. Lucky that she knew her rights and had the authority to demand accountability. But luck shouldn't be what keeps you alive during a traffic stop. Following the law should be enough. Being innocent should be enough. Being human should be enough. Lauren walked to her kitchen and filled a glass with water. Her throat was dry. Her head was pounding and her whole body ached. But she was alive. She was home, and tomorrow she would start fighting to make sure this never happened to anyone else. Not on her watch. Monday morning came too quickly. Lauren hadn't slept well all weekend. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Officer Thornton's face, saw the barrel of his gun pointed at her. She'd wake up with her heart racing, sheets tangled around her legs, the image burned into her mind. She arrived at the FBI field office early, before most of her colleagues. The building felt different somehow, like she was seeing it through new eyes. These halls, these offices, this had been her home for 12 years. She'd always felt safe here, protected. Now she wondered how many other agents had stories like hers, experiences they'd never shared because they didn't think anyone would understand. Director Morrison was already in his office when she knocked. He looked up from his computer and gestured for her to come in. Chen, how are you holding up? She sat down in the chair across from his desk. I've been better, sir. He nodded slowly, studying her face. I've reviewed the preliminary reports. I've also watched the body camera footage from Officer Davis. What happened to you was completely unacceptable. Lauren had watched the footage too, late Saturday night when she couldn't sleep. Seeing it from the outside was strange, like watching someone else's nightmare. But it was her voice she heard, calm and professional even with a gun in her face. It was her body forced to the ground. It was her dignity stripped away on a public street. The Department of Justice is taking an interest in this case, Morrison continued. Their Civil Rights Division wants to review everything. They're also looking into Officer Thornton's history. His history? Lauren leaned forward. Morrison pulled up something on his computer screen, then turned the monitor so she could see. Thornton has been with the department for 8 years. In that time, he's had 17 complaints filed against him. 15 of them were from people of color. All of them were dismissed or resulted in minor reprimands. 17 complaints. Lauren felt her stomach turn. How is he still on the street? That's exactly what the DOJ wants to know. There's a pattern here, Chen. You're not the first person he's targeted. You're just the first one with enough authority to make people pay attention. The weight of that statement settled over her like a heavy blanket. She thought about all those other people, the ones who'd filed complaints that went nowhere, the ones who'd been pulled over, threatened, humiliated, and then had their experiences dismissed as misunderstandings or exaggerations. How many of them had been forced to their knees? How many had guns pointed at their faces? There's more, Morrison said. We pulled the dash cam footage from Thornton's patrol car for the past 6 months. We're seeing a clear pattern of selective enforcement. He pulls over Black and Hispanic drivers at nearly 4 times the rate of white drivers in the same area. And his stops are more aggressive, more likely to involve searches, more likely to escalate. Lauren thought about her own stop. She'd been driving through a quiet suburban neighborhood, following every traffic law. There had been no reason to pull her over except one. She'd been Black in a neighborhood that was predominantly white. That had been enough. What happens now? She asked. Now we build a case, not just against Thornton, but against the culture that allowed this to happen. The police department that ignored 17 complaints. The supervisors who saw the pattern and did nothing. This goes deeper than one racist cop, Chen. This is about systemic failure. Over the next few weeks, Lauren's life became consumed by the investigation. She gave multiple interviews, first to FBI Internal Affairs, then to DOJ investigators, then to a special prosecutor assigned to the case. She told her story over and over, each time reliving those terrifying minutes on Maple Street. The media got hold of the story. At first it was just local news, but it quickly spread. FBI agent held at gunpoint during traffic stop ran in newspapers across the country. The body camera footage was released to the public, and within days it had been viewed millions of times online. Lauren's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations wanted her to speak at their events. People she hadn't talked to in years were reaching out, some to offer support, others just curious about what had happened. But it was the other messages that hit her the hardest. Messages from strangers, mostly women of color sharing their own stories. A doctor in Atlanta who'd been pulled over and searched on her way to the hospital. A teacher in Chicago who'd been handcuffed in front of her students during a traffic stop near her school. A lawyer in Miami who'd been thrown against her car and injured because an officer thought she was reaching for a weapon when she was just grabbing her phone. Story after story after story, each one unique but all sharing the same thread of fear, humiliation, and injustice. Lauren read every single message, and with each one her resolve grew stronger. One afternoon, Agent Wilson found her at her desk, staring at her computer screen. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. "You okay?" he asked. Lauren gestured at her screen, which was filled with messages. "Did you know this happens so often?" "I mean, I knew it was a problem. I've seen the statistics, read the reports, but reading these personal stories, it's different. It's real in a way that numbers never are." Wilson was quiet for a moment. He was a white man in his 40s, a good agent and a better friend. He'd been Lauren's partner for 5 years, and they'd been through a lot together. But she could see on his face that he was struggling with something. "I didn't know," he finally said. "Or maybe I did know, but I didn't really understand. I've been pulled over probably a dozen times in my life." "You know what happened every single time?" The officer was polite. "I handed over my license. Sometimes I got a ticket, sometimes just a warning. But I was never afraid. I never thought I might not make it home." "That's privilege," Lauren said quietly, "not having to be afraid." "Yeah," Wilson agreed. "I'm starting to see that. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you went through this. I'm sorry that so many people go through this. And I'm sorry that it took something happening to someone I know personally for me to really get it." Lauren appreciated his honesty. It would have been easy for him to stay silent, to pretend everything was fine. But he was trying to understand, and that mattered. The investigation into Officer Thornton continued to expand. Investigators discovered that he had a private social media account where he'd shared racist memes and made disturbing comments about the communities he was supposed to serve. They found text messages between him and other officers that showed a pattern of discriminatory attitudes, but they also found something else. Security camera footage from a gas station showed Thornton pulling over another black woman 2 weeks before Lauren's stop. The footage showed him approaching her car with his hand on his weapon, searching her vehicle without proper cause, and detaining her for nearly an hour before letting her go without any charges. The woman's name was Patricia Henderson. She was a social worker, a mother of 3, and she'd filed a complaint about the stop that had been dismissed as unfounded. When investigators reached out to her, she broke down in tears. "I thought I was crazy," Patricia told them. "Everyone kept telling me that the officer was just doing his job, that I must have done something wrong. But I knew I hadn't. I knew he targeted me because of how I looked. Nobody believed me until now." Patricia's case became part of the federal investigation. So did cases from 6 other victims who came forward after seeing Lauren's story in the news. Each one had filed complaints. Each one had been ignored. Each one had lived with the trauma of being targeted and then told it was their imagination. Lauren met with Patricia one afternoon at a coffee shop. They sat across from each other, 2 women who'd never met but who shared an experience that bonded them in an instant. "Thank you," Patricia said. "Thank you for fighting this. Thank you for making people listen." "I should be thanking you," Lauren replied. "You filed your complaint even though you knew it probably wouldn't go anywhere. You stood up for yourself." "That takes courage," Patricia smiled sadly. "Courage or stubbornness. I wasn't going to let him make me feel like I'd done something wrong when I hadn't. But it's hard, you know. Fighting a system that doesn't want to hear you." "It is hard," Lauren agreed. "But it's necessary. And now we're fighting together." By the end of the month, the case had grown beyond anything Lauren had imagined. It wasn't just about one traffic stop anymore. It was about accountability, about justice, about changing a broken system. And Lauren found herself at the center of it all, not because she'd wanted to be, but because she refused to stay silent. 3 months after that night on Maple Street, Lauren stood in a federal courtroom watching Officer Thornton face the consequences of his actions. He looked smaller somehow, less intimidating in his civilian clothes without the uniform and badge that had given him power over so many people. The charges were serious. Civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment. The prosecution had built an airtight case using body camera footage, witness testimonies, and the pattern of behavior they'd uncovered during the investigation. 17 complaints, 8 victims willing to testify, years of documented discrimination. Lauren sat in the front row next to Patricia Henderson and the other victims. They'd all become close over the past few months, bonded by shared trauma and the long fight for justice. They'd supported each other through the investigation, through the media attention, through the hard days when it felt like nothing would ever change. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Lauren felt Patricia grab her hand and squeeze tight. Around them, people in the courtroom exhaled collectively, some crying with relief, others nodding with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just a verdict, it was validation. It was the system finally saying, "We believe you. What happened to you was wrong." Thornton was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and banned from ever working in law enforcement again. His partner, Officer Davis, received a lesser sentence for failing to intervene and report misconduct. But the case didn't end there. The Department of Justice launched a full investigation into the police department that had employed Thornton. They found what Lauren had suspected all along. The problem wasn't just one bad officer. It was a culture that had protected him, a system that had ignored complaints, supervisors who had seen the warning signs and looked the other way. The police chief resigned. 3 supervisors were demoted. The entire department was placed under federal oversight, required to implement sweeping reforms in how they trained officers, responded to complaints, and tracked patterns of behavior. Lauren was invited to testify before a congressional committee examining police accountability. She sat at a long table facing rows of senators and representatives, cameras pointed at her from every angle. She'd faced armed criminals without flinching, but this made her nervous in a different way. This was her chance to make a difference beyond her own case. "My name is Special Agent Lauren Chen," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. and I'm here to tell you what it's like to be held at gunpoint for the crime of driving while black." She told her story again, but this time she framed it differently. She talked about the statistics, the patterns, the systemic issues that allowed officers like Thornton to continue targeting people year after year. She talked about the other victims, the ones who didn't have badges or federal authority to protect them. She talked about the children growing up afraid of the people who were supposed to protect them. "I'm one of the lucky ones," she said, looking directly at the committee members. "I survived my encounter with Officer Thornton. I had the resources and the authority to fight back. But how many people don't? How many traffic stops end with families planning funerals instead of filing complaints? How many voices have been silenced because the system refused to listen?" The hearing room was completely silent. Lauren could see some of the representatives leaning forward, hanging on her every word. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Good, she thought. They should be uncomfortable. "This isn't about hating police officers," she continued. "I work with law enforcement every day. I know the vast majority of officers are good people trying to do a difficult job. But we cannot let the good ones shield the bad ones. We cannot let loyalty to the badge become more important than justice for the people we're supposed to serve." She presented recommendations, mandatory bias training that actually worked, not just checking boxes, better systems for tracking complaints across departments, real consequences for officers who abuse their power, independent oversight boards with actual authority, body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public. When she finished, the committee chair thanked her for her testimony. Several representatives came up afterward to shake her hand and promise action. Lauren had been around Washington long enough to know that promises didn't always mean change. But it was a start. The story spread beyond courtrooms and congressional hearings. News outlets ran features about Lauren and the other victims. Magazines wrote profiles. Documentary filmmakers reached out wanting to tell the story. Lauren was careful about what she agreed to, always making sure the focus stayed on the issue, not just on her. She started receiving invitations to speak at police academies. The first time she stood in front of a room full of new recruits, she felt strange. These young officers looked at her with respect, hanging on her words, taking notes. She wondered if Thornton had sat in a room like this once, if someone had tried to teach him to see people as human beings first, not threats. "You're going to have power," she told them. "Real power over people's lives. You'll have a gun, a badge, and the authority of the law behind you. The question is, what kind of officer are you going to be? Are you going to use that power to protect people? Or are you going to use it to hurt them?" She showed them the body camera footage from her stop. She made them watch the whole thing, made them see how quickly a routine stop could turn deadly. Some of the recruits looked shaken by what they saw. That was good. They should be shaken. "That woman being forced to her knees, that's me," she told them. "I'm a federal agent with 12 years of experience. I've taken down drug dealers and human traffickers, and I was absolutely terrified because I didn't know if I was going to survive that traffic stop. Now imagine you're not a federal agent. Imagine you're just someone trying to get home after work. Imagine that's your mother, your sister, your daughter." The training sessions became part of a larger initiative. The FBI developed a new program on implicit bias and de-escalation, and Lauren helped design it. She shared her story over and over, but she also brought in other voices. Patricia Henderson talked about being a social worker detained for an hour for no reason. A teenager named Deshaun told them about being pulled over on his way to his high school graduation. A grandmother named Ruth described being handcuffed in front of her grandchildren during a traffic stop near her church. Each story was different, but they all shared common threads: fear, humiliation, the crushing weight of being seen as guilty until proven innocent, and the frustration of being told their experiences weren't real, weren't valid, weren't worth addressing. Months turned into a year. Lauren's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined that evening on Maple Street. She'd become an advocate, a voice for people who'd been silenced. She'd helped change policies not just in one department but across the country. Other cities were implementing reforms based on the recommendations that came out of her case. But the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished, not really. Change happened slowly, one policy at a time, one officer at a time, one conversation at a time. One afternoon, Lauren found herself driving through the same neighborhood where she'd been pulled over. She'd avoided it for months, taking longer routes to get home. But today she'd decided it was time to face it. She drove slowly down Maple Street, past the houses where neighbors had come out to witness her humiliation. Several of them had become friends. Rebecca Torres, the woman who'd recorded the video, had organized a neighborhood watch program focused on accountability and community relationships with police. Lauren pulled over and parked in almost the exact spot where Thornton had forced her to stop. She got out of her car and stood there, looking at the pavement where she'd knelt that night. The marks on her knees had long since healed, but the memory was still fresh. A car approached from behind and Lauren tensed instinctively. Old habits died hard, but it was just a neighbor coming home from work. They waved as they passed and Lauren waved back. She thought about how far she'd come. How far they'd all come. Thornton was in prison. The department had been reformed. Training programs were changing across the country. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something. Lauren got back in her car and drove home. She didn't feel afraid anymore. At least not the same paralyzing fear she'd felt that night. She felt something else now. Determination. Hope. The knowledge that speaking up had mattered, that fighting back had made a difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. News interview went well. They asked about you. Told them you're the reason any of us are being heard. Lauren smiled and texted back. We did this together. That's the only reason it worked, and it was true. Change didn't come from one person, one case, one moment. It came from people standing together, refusing to accept injustice, demanding better from the systems that were supposed to protect them. Lauren had been forced to her knees that night on Maple Street. But she'd stood back up, and she'd made sure that when she stood, she lifted others with her. That was her legacy now. Not the federal agent who was held at gunpoint, but the woman who turned trauma into action, fear into courage, silence into a voice that couldn't be ignored.